Hello, everyone. That was really calm, wasn't it? Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's Tuesday, as normal. So we're going to edit your pictures as we always do in that program there. So that one being Capture One. Capture One being the program that is made by the clever people in Copenhagen, in Denmark, who are far cleverer than I, and probably most of us on this channel. But anyway, we are the people that have to use that software, and quite often some of the little tricks and pieces and little corners of the software get missed. So hopefully we're going to pick up some of those and explain them in this session with your pictures, not mine, over the next hour. So for those of you that are new to this, this is an interactive session. What I mean by that is if you're online now, live, please type, heckle, discuss, argue, debate, whatever you want to use as a word, but please make it as interactive as you want. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk at you, and that gets a little bit boring for 60 minutes. For those of you that are watching this in the future, or where we were in the past, this is as interactive as a brick, unfortunately. But what you can do is put comments in, and we'll try and answer as many questions as you have in the future once this video is posted. So there we go. Interactive in two ways. It's like 4D. This software, so Capture One, is, as I say, it's a raw editing piece of software, so it allows us to take the data that's from the sensor in your camera, that's come through a lens, and that's come from the light that was in front of the lens onto the sensor, and recorded onto a memory card. Wonderful. But that raw data tends to be a little bit different to what our brains remember seeing. Remember, it's not our eyes that see what we see, it's our brains that do, because we interpret things based on our experiences, our expectations, past views, visions, what we're suggested. We're very suggested or suggestible as human beings. Is Paul looking dark today, or is it me, Roger? Paul's not looking dark. It may be just because I'm tired. Sorry, mate. But maybe turn up the brightness in your screen. I haven't changed anything. Maybe I've got a suntan. Don't know. Not likely, because I tend to live in here when I'm not out shooting. Our brains basically interpret stuff that we see, and in a way that we remember, and in a way that's memorable. And the challenge is that raw data that the camera sensor has recorded sometimes is a little bit different to what our brains remember. So we use the software that's available to us, whether that's Capture One or any other raw processor, to bring the picture back to what we saw. Now, the problem with doing that is sometimes if we use a tool too heavily, or the wrong tool, or we're a little bit stuck, we can make a picture look worse, not better. And there are sometimes some challenges. So today we're going to run through, I think, probably 4 or 5 pictures. We're going to try for that, with what's gone well, what's gone not so well, and everything in between, and we'll try and fix the problems that you're experiencing. Remember that everything we edit in this session together, but basically me, is my hand on the mouse, is my interpretation of it. So it's nothing to do with what's right or what's wrong. This is about personal interpretation. So my interpretation of a scene will be different to yours, which will be different to your neighbors, which will be different to your families. Don't take it necessarily as gospel that this is the right way. It's just an alternative way if you were struggling. For those of you that have no idea what Capture One is, go to captureone.com. That will explain it a lot better than I can. But effectively, it's some software that you can use as a bridge between your camera and whether it's print or a pixel editor, to get your pictures into the best shape possible. If you don't have it, free 30-day trial, download it, have a play. If you do have it, please make sure you're on the latest version. The current version, still, touch wood, as of today, is 16.6.4. That had some little tweaks from, so 16.6 was the big upgrade that introduced face retouch and a couple of other tricks for session users. That piece of software has been refined in 16.6.1, 0.2, 0.3, and now 0.4. If you purchase 16.6 point anything, you're entitled to be on this version because it's a point release. If you are on a subscription, you are entitled to be on this version because you already pay for it. If you purchased 16.5, 16.4, 16.3, you get the gist. You are not entitled to this piece of software if you bought it as a perpetual license, which means you'll need to go into your account and upgrade if you want to be on this version. For those of you that don't use face retouch and don't necessarily rely on multi-folder session, you might find that there's not necessarily a compelling reason right now to go to 16.6, unless it's based on your camera compatibility, operating system compatibility, or some bugs. If it's none of those and you're happy with your 16 point whatever, 15 point whatever for that matter, stick with it. Why bother? Good little white balance test, maybe. I look too red, too much white balance. I don't. Do I? Hold on. Let me get out of the printer because I don't have a white card with me. Where's a piece of paper? See, that's not red. So my white balance is all right. I'm just dark today. I'm having a dark day. There we go. It's cloudy. Right. Before we get into the software itself, now I've made my handy little white card. Let's just cover a couple of things. So, number one, I covered some of these last week. Number one, those of you that want to get out and about and get a suntan like mine out on the Dorset coast, you can do that in March next year with our friends at Teamwork. So I am hosting, along with Teamwork, a little mini workshop. I think it's 4 days, 3 nights, I think. 5th to the 8th. There we go. Out on the coastline, we're going to be shooting pretty much every iconic scene that we can grab along the Dorset coast. And editing them, and we'll have some involvement from some other experts with dealers and other surprise guests. There we go. But you need to book if you want to do that. So go to the link that's in the description. There are a very significantly limited number of spaces on it. It's a very small workshop in general terms. We don't generally do group workshops. Normally it's a one-to-one thing for me. So if you want to go out and explore, it's a good time to do it. It's actually genuinely, it's a good time in terms of season to go and do it. But we'll have a blast running around the coastline with those guys. And Teamwork are nice guys, so should have a look at it. Secondly, entering competitions. Why not? Why wouldn't you? So if you think your photos are good enough, whack them into the International Printmasters competition. So the BIPP is the oldest photographic institution in the world, 1901, and they run an annual competition, and that competition allows you to submit your best work, and hopefully you win awards, and then you become an award-winning photographer. Isn't that fun? But maybe you're not good enough. Who knows? But you won't know unless you try. Finally, before we get going into Capture One, I said last week we're launching this, which is a fun little collaboration. I have the first copy off the press. So this stuff, which is my stuff, so not your photos, my photos, we've done some work with a guy called Thomas in Europe. Europe being that big amalgamous space, but he and I share the same view on print and how important print is, and we've built a little magazinette thing. It's a little printed collection of 20 images that are in print, that are browsable and so on. It will be out there on his distribution channels at some point, but we've decided to hold back the first 50, make them all personalised, make them all signed, make them all lovely, and we'll ship them around worldwide. So if you want to have a look at that, that's in the description as well. Lots of links today in the descriptions. I feel like QVC. How do they do that for 2 hours? Can't. Right. Anyway, there we go. So, quick recap before we go any further. Number one, this is the current version of Capture One. If you are not on it, you might want to consider it. But if you do not need the features in there, save your money and do it later. No problem. Number two, the money that you've saved in not upgrading the version, you could go on a fantastic workshop around Dorset. Wouldn't that be fun? And that's in about 6 months' time. So get booking. If you want to, it's down there and it's with Teamwork. If you've got photos that are good enough to be an award-winning photo, then you need to tell the world about it, and you do it through there. So again, that link's down there too. And finally, if you want some reading material for any particular room in your home, why not have a look at that? That's in there too. All that said, let's go to Capture One. I'm knackered. This is Roger's shot. Welcome to Roger's shot. I briefly flashed this up on the screen last week, and then we skipped to a black and white, but we're going to go back to this one today. And Roger's challenge, so this is the edited version, so this is what has been sent through. For those of you that want to know how to send stuff through, very simple, you go there. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, upload your file, give us your name, do not forget your name, because if you don't put your name in there, we cannot include your image. It's very, very simple. But also put a description of what you are having problems with or challenges with, or not. If you're happy with it, let's have a look. But that's the place to go to upload, and we'll have them on this little show. That's cool. So Roger's challenge on this one was the boundary between the sky and the hill starting to look a little bit artificial, and also maybe some artifacts starting to grow and some halos around the edges and stuff like that. The normal stuff, to be honest, with the landscape. And again, one of the biggest things, and those of you that have been on here for whoops, sorry, didn't mean to make anyone feel sick. For anyone that has known this channel for a while, you'll know that I'm a huge fan. In fact, it's gospel. This is a fact. You must use before and after. And I would use it after every significant change to an image. Don't have to use it permanently. You don't have to edit in before and after. But this little box up here, and if you don't have it, right click, customize toolbar. You can grab it from here. Where are we? Before and after, drag it up there, and then it'll be up there. But this one, you've got two choices. You can either have a full before and after or a split view, and you press the Y key on your keyboard or click the little icon, and up it comes. And I can see my before, which is typically my raw. So by the way we use the word raw, this is a raw that's effectively had nothing done to it, right? So let me just create a clone of the variant. I'm not going to edit Roger's original edit, so we're going to keep that as a baseline. I'm creating a clone, so right click on the image, clone variant, and that clone means that I can edit this one to my heart's content, and I'm not affecting the other. I have not duplicated the raw file, I've just duplicated the container with the edits. It's the same raw file underneath. So in this case, where I'm seeing before, I'm viewing before, let's say I change my exposure. Thumbnail updated, but this one didn't, right? Let's change my highlights and pull them back. Let's change the white balance and go warmer, maybe more pink. Interesting, right? Let's even change our film curve, or our ICC curve. So I've made loads of changes there, but nothing's happened. The reason is because I'm looking at the raw. I'm looking at the original import into Capture One. It's not quite the raw data, so please don't confuse this. This isn't the raw data out of your camera. You can't actually understand or see the raw data out of your camera. This is Capture One's initial interpretation of that data based on your camera profile, the lens profile, and everything that's been brought in. The after is all the changes that I just made, and we can see them. Okay. Now the reason that we want to keep referring to this, and whether it's in split screen, whether it's in full screen, doesn't make an ounce of difference to me. But I want to make sure that I'm checking this every time I do anything substantial. So if I'm making a tiny little tweak to a blue, okay, fine, or a tiny little white balance change, it doesn't really matter in that sense. But every time I do something big, or actually as a guideline, every time I add a new layer and make an adjustment, go back to the before and just check that your after isn't too far away. The reason being, let's say I edited this and I'm like, actually, this is looking really cool. This wouldn't be on my screen because I wouldn't have duplicated it. And all I'm seeing is all these changes I've made to my edit, and the thumbnail's updating, great. And I can get very, very carried away. And it's only when I do this that we get that shock, horror, cold, draining blood feeling through our body of, oh my God, what have I done? So this is essential. Please keep referring to your before and after. Let's clone that variant and we'll start again from here. Next one is always have open layers and histogram on every single tab that you're working on to make sure that when you are on a layer, for instance here, if I started doing sharpening here, it's only affecting this land layer, which is this bit. If I was sharpening here, it's affecting my entire image layer. I don't know that if my layers are collapsed. So please, whenever you're editing in Capture One, make sure you've got your layers visible, and on any tool tab that's talking about exposure or brightness or anything like that, make sure you have your histogram available, because this is your output histogram, not the input. This here is your input histogram. Same with curve. This is what the camera recorded. This is what this is what Capture One is going to spit out effectively. If I change my levels, for example, This up here, my output histogram is changing significantly. This one is not, because it's keeping a reference so that I know where I'm moving my levels to. Okay. Right. So all that said, why are we saying all that? Well, because in each of these edits here, what Roger's done, there's nothing wrong with any of the edits. It's just the compound effect of them can have some of these artifacts start to creep in. And overall, Roger, if I was looking at this, I would say part of the problem is, excuse me, this is a very, very, very sharp image. It's on a, I don't know, oh, it's a Panasonic G90. Okay. So very, it's tack sharp throughout. The lens is clearly very good. And what's happened is it's been sharpened and sharpened more and more and more, not just through sharpening, we'll talk about that in a second, but it's been enhanced to the point where what was already sharp is now overly sharp. And that feeling that it's starting to look a little bit unusual or a little bit unreal, unnatural, can come directly from the fact that it's been it's too crisp. That's the word. It's too crisp. It's like if you over fry a chip, and I mean a proper chip, not potato chip. That's a crisp. But if you over fry an actual chip, a chip shop chip, it's crispy, it's lovely, but there's no potato left. Same thing in here. The edges here, they're crispy, they're lovely, but there's no detail left. I like that analogy. Might stick with that one. So all that's happened is these are just compound layers that have added to this challenge. So if I were to undo these layers and we go back to the image layer, so the image layer itself, there's nothing really going on with exposure. Let's go to our lens correction. So that's been loaded in. I might be tempted to turn on diffraction correction at f8, and I can see a little bit. So let me just zoom in too much here. So that's 500%. If I turn this on, it sharpens it just a touch. It just gets rid of some of the edge blurring that's going on. So I would turn on diffraction correction. It's not a hard, fast rule. We don't say at f8 or at f11, whatever, to do it. Any tool in Capture One, do what you want. Check that it's either improved or not. If it has not improved, don't do it. So I'm being very specific with that. It's not a case of it hasn't harmed it. If it does not improve it, do not use the tool. If it improves it, great. If it harms it, don't use it, obviously. But if it makes no difference, don't use it. If you don't need to, don't add tools in that you don't necessarily need, because they may have impact later on. Light fall off has got rid of some of the vignetting naturally from the lens, some distortion correction on there. Sharpness fall off, I mean, you don't need it on this lens. And in fact, let me just show you. If I were to put the sharpness fall off up, this is now going too crunchy already, right? So even without, so there's no layers on this. This is just the image layer, the base image layer. Even with that sharpness fall off has a very, very, very small impact generally across the image. But any more than about 25%, it's just too much. So this is a really crisp, lovely, sharp image. Great. So let's look at our layers. So the first one is a deep sky layer, which has been done over here. There was a question that was put on maybe YouTube, it may be Facebook, one of the two groups that we have. How do I do this deep sky layer very quickly? We've shown this for many, many weeks. So for those of you that are still asking this, where have you been? But I will show you very quickly. Let's create a brand new variant. Okay. What we're referring to is in the built-in style brushes under enhancements, there's a lovely thing called deep sky. But the problem is, in order to get a deep sky layer, I have to start painting in deep sky. What I can't do, so let's imagine I have a lovely AI layer for my sky. When it loads, thank you. Click, and it creates a layer called AI Mask 1. Lovely. Now I'd like to apply deep sky to this layer. How do I do that? Well, I guess I'd go to deep sky, right? And I click, oh. So it has created a deep sky layer, and it's done some deep sky work where I brushed, but it's on its own layer. It hasn't done it onto my layer that I wanted. And that's annoying for a lot of people. So here's the quick answer. Number one, let's say I've got this layer and I'm happy with it. So I'm going to just refine it so we can see that it's a very different layer. Okay, so I'm happy with this layer for whatever reason. It's not the right layer. Don't copy what I've done, but you get the idea. So we're going to call this one happy. So two ways of getting the sky or anything in broad terms in Capture One to be deep sky or any other star brush. So first way, number one, create your little layer that you're happy with. Go to your deep sky brush, paint one little dot. It'll create a layer for you called Deep Sky 1. Right click on the layer, clear mask. Right click on the layer, copy mask from happy. The layer that I was happy with. Done. I can actually delete the happy layer if I want to now. That's gone. And now my deep sky mask is the same as what I had already as a layer. So that's the one way of doing it. Second way of doing it, I go to my deep sky. I click, doesn't matter where I click, because the first thing I'm going to do is right click, clear mask. I have a layer here that has the deep sky attributes. It just doesn't have any mask to it. So anything I now do with a mask, whether that's an AI brush, or let's say it's not an AI brush, let's say it's a graduated filter, it's now going to apply to that layer with all the deep sky settings. So you can either create a layer that you're happy with, create a deep sky layer, empty it and copy the mask, or create a deep sky layer, empty it, either way, and create your very complex mask. Either one, doesn't matter, but that's how you do it for any style brush. Doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter whether you've got it from, I mean, we've got a light trail, traffic trail style brush that we use for cities, which is in the elevation pack. That layer, if I've already done an excruciating job of finding all the light trails in the image, I don't want to create that again with a brush. So what I do is I just take the mask I've already made for the light trails and do exactly the same with deep sky, but with this one here, traffic trails. It does the same thing. So there we go. Right, so let's go back to Roger's, because Roger has a deep sky layer that is the sky, funnily enough, and it's been refined a little bit. So, okay. Now that layer, let's go into 200% to be really unfair, is making the sky more blue. It's making the sky more saturated, even though the saturation slider isn't here. What it's probably doing, yeah, so it's pulling up the blue channel here and in maybe under advanced, yeah, so we've got blue here. It's actually darkening it down, so it's giving the perception that it's more saturated. It's actually because the blues are getting darker and deeper, effectively. Whether there's some color balance on, so the highlights have gone more blue, more saturated in here. Midtones have gone to be warmer. But effectively, that's having the effect of bluening, making more blue the sky. Lovely. Lightening it a little bit, and you get quite a nice definition then of these clouds, which is what deep sky is meant to do. So that on its own, not a huge deal, not causing much of a problem. It is causing a little bit of haloing around these edges. And some of that, just some, is going to be because the boundary here, so in the deep sky layer itself, you've got these HDR sliders, and we've also got some clarity. Clarity and HDR sliders really aren't good friends with edges and sharpness and contrast on the edge of shapes. Because the sky or the deep sky layer goes over the rock, and I can see that by going into grayscale, you see. So although it's not literally white solid, it is spanning across the edge of the rock, and the result is you can get this slight little halo here. But I'm at 1600%, right? When we come out to 100%, or even actually 200%, you can't see that. So the deep sky layer, okay, we're good. The healing layer. So I'm guessing, yeah, we've got something down here that was removed. Let's just turn that mask off. Yeah, so that's okay. And then the land layer. Now, this is where it gets more interesting. Because you see, it's like turning on the lights, right? So we go from there, quite a natural looking land, to boom. Okay. And this is where I would agree, Roger. This does start to look a little artificial. In terms of the deep sky discussion, there you go. 2 votes for the second approach. Prasad and Paula. Sad, lonely, no votes for the first. Oh well. So whether you want to create your mask first, the interesting bit with the first method is if you already have a mask that you've already drawn, there is no point in literally reinventing the wheel. Use the same mask and just apply it to deep sky. No issue. Right, back to Roger's image. It's this land layer, Roger, that's killing you. So, and this is why I'm saying this before and after, because if I was doing this edit, so let's go to my image layer, before and after, nothing much has changed. Didn't really change much in there. Okay. Then the deep sky layer came along. Yeah, I'm good with that. Before and after's helping me. Then the healing layer came along. Yeah, of course, no issue. It's the point that I did this land layer that when I do before and after, it goes from calm to bleeding eyes. And it's this fence is probably the best example of it. Look at what's happened to some of the detail. So when I'm talking about crispy, crunchy detail, it's not a positive thing. We like to talk about crisp, sharp images and stuff like that. Yes, but there's a limit, and this has pushed it too far, and that's why it feels artificial. That's all. So this is about contrast, and where I said earlier, it's not purely sharpening. It's contrast, it's clarity, it's all the stuff that makes it more punchy. And unfortunately, more punchy can result in something that looks a little bit fake. So on here, on this layer, there isn't actually any additional sharpening, which is interesting. There also isn't a huge amount of clarity and structure, a little bit maybe. So if I were to undo this, redo, undo, redo, I'm not seeing huge amounts of change. The way I'm doing that is holding down the Alt key or the Option key, and then clicking on the mouse with the little undo button, but while holding the keyboard down, which means when I let go, it goes back to what my settings were. So this is having an effect, and you can see it subtly, but it's not huge. What else is having an effect? Well, let's look at our levels. That is having an effect, right? We'll come back to that. And then let's look at our exposure tab. Yep. And then our HDR tab finally. Okay. So let's break these down, because there's an interesting paradox. I like that word. I think it's the right word. I might have got the wrong word, but either way, I like it. And there's an interesting paradox in here between the use of two of these different tools. The levels tool here has been used to bring the highlights to be super bright. So in other words, stretch them. So anything that was 213 is now 255. There is a problem with that, which is if I turn on my exposure warning, we'll probably find some little specular bits that are maybe a little overblown. Maybe not quite. Okay, so we've got a couple bits that are close to 255, but 245. Okay, we're pretty good. But these black shadow bits come from this other tail end. So this is about making the shadows that were 17 now 0. So in other words, stretch the histogram. So imagine a histogram goes from 0 to 255, black to white in simple terms. This is saying, actually, I want to stretch this histogram to make it that whole 255 scale. Black is to be 17, white is to be 213. In other words, stretch the data that I have and make the light parts lighter, the dark parts darker. But the problem is, look at this. Undoing it, I get no shadow warning. I also have no exposure warning. Redoing it, I have a shadow warning. So what Roger's done is then use the black slider to try and undo that as an antidote and lift up the very darkest parts of the image. Well, by doing that, I'm negating what I did with my levels. But in the meantime, let's just undo that one. But in the meantime, the levels change has meant that I've made this so crunchy. It goes from there to there, that I've got very little room to move from now on. Now then, on top of that, so compounding it, not only have we stretched the histogram, 17, 213 becomes 0 and 255, so darks darker, lights lighter, the middle stays the same. We've then corrected some of the black. You can't fix all of it, but it's gone back down to this sort of 20 and below level, and it's tried to rescue them, make them lighter. Doesn't really make sense given that we've just done this effort to make them darker. But then, on top of all of that, we've got a contrast shift, which 6 isn't huge, but it basically draws a line down the middle of the histogram and says, right, lighter parts get lighter again, darker parts get darker again. So we're adding more contrast in. And then we're using brightness to lift the image, but the problem with brightness is it squishes the histogram. So it's not, so contrast separates it, brightness squishes it around the midtones up to be lighter. So that loses contrast. So you've got these two combating each other. This one, what's the word? Not conflated, compounding. There we go. Made huge eyes as well, so I got the right word. This one compounding the issue with levels, and then the black slider to try and compensate for it. So I'm in a place, Roger, where I could just whack down the opacity for this, but if I reduce the contrast, leave the brightness where it was, maybe leave the black slider where it was, but pull this one down here. Okay, so now I've got a lot more. It feels faded, I get that. But then if it is feeling faded on the land, why don't we just not do the brightness? Maybe a little bit of contrast, a couple points of contrast, and maybe a touch of saturation, and that's it. That's where I'd get to. And it goes from there to there. It's not a huge difference, but it is starting to feel a little more coherent, as in it doesn't feel like the sky and the land are now completely separated because the contrast difference hasn't changed. On top of that, if it were my shot, I'd want to lead up to here. We do that with a subtle little exposure change. And the same almost up in the sky. So I'm going to just create another slightly diagonal exposure drop. So a gradient layer, so a graduated filter, as if you'd put one in front of the camera. I'm just going to drop it down by maybe half a stop, maybe a little less, so to there. I could put it, so this light fall off that was done actually has the effect of making this feel like it's fading as you go out towards the edges of the image. So let's maybe undo that. Let's have this light fall off come back to the natural light of the lens. And to me, that just feels okay. It feels better. We don't miss any detail in this shadow here. We can still see rocks. Whereas here, look, pitch black. So this is the original edit on the top. This is our edit down here. Although it is dark, I've got data in here everywhere. Look at these numbers on the top of the screen. So we're at 20s, 22s, 23s, 24s. Here, 0. Black, 0, 0. And I get it, because what you tried to do was then use your layer for land to pull these blacks up, but it's too late. You've already chopped them down here, and we've made them worse here with the contrast. So it's kind of it's a chase your own tail one on this shot. These changes are very, very subtle between the top one and the bottom one, but the bottom one feels more consistent between the sky and the subject, or the sky and the foreground, and it doesn't feel so crushed. Let me just pull up both of these and just go into that gate. So this one here just feels too crunchy. And again, if you look at the background here, this feels natural. It feels slightly washed out in the grays. This one just feels too high contrast. And that's all it is. So ironically, it's not a sharpening issue. The reason this looks a little bit overdone and has some halo issues is the contrast. It's not the sharpening. That's all. So there we go. Ryan, are exposure evaluation and the histogram the same until you make changes to the image or file? You mean the output histogram? So what Brian's referring to is in your tether tab, you will have exposure evaluation. And that exposure evaluation, if I were to just flag this one to edit. Let's pull up a floating tool. So window, create floating tool, exposure evaluation. Couldn't find it then for a second. So, and in fact, I'm just going to pull up another floating tool called histogram. So we can see at the moment that these two do not match. Why do they not match? Because the histogram is output. If I were to go into here onto the image layer and change my exposure, my output histogram will change completely. My input histogram, in other words, what was recorded, will not. So your exposure evaluation is telling you literally what was the clues in the name. It's evaluated the original exposure. If I go into a curve and make changes here, it will change the output histogram. It will not change the input, the exposure evaluation. If I go to contrast and brightness, it does affect my levels tool. Bear that in mind, because our levels are subject to that data. In other words, I need to see what's happened to the histogram in order to make decisions on the levels. So levels doesn't change. The histogram in levels doesn't change when I use the levels tool, but it will change when I use other tools. But again, look, this exposure evaluation is locked. So your exposure evaluation is literally what the camera recorded and Capture One initially imported. This does not change. Your histogram does. Levels tool can for tools other than levels when they affect it. I think that answers your question. Roger. I often find Capture One adjustments made at the start are countered later on. I've seen this on for others. It's exactly that. So let's just close these tools down. I want to remind you all of what I said at the very beginning of this, which is before and after tool. And I cannot say it more clearly than that, which is if I am doing something with a tool that feels major, or I'm doing something with a big layer and that layer is having an impact, use your before and after tool to see what's happened. And the things I'm looking for in the before and after tool: have I crushed any shadows? Have I blown any highlights? I would turn on my exposure warning. I want to see, do I have any issues here with too dark shadows? When I go into here, look, yes, I do. This original edit has all these things where the shadow, and my shadow warning, by the way, is set to 0. It's not set to some sort of margin. These are literally unusable shadows. Let's just get rid of that exposure warning. There's no data in there. There was in the raw, and there is in this edit, but in this treatment there isn't. And that would have been flagged up if you'd gone through before and after, layer by layer. Don't get into the habit of using another tool to fix what one tool has had. There are circumstances where it's useful, for sure. If you want to add a huge amount of contrast for whatever reason, and you need to fix the very, very darkest parts, still come in a place of then you've probably done levels or curves wrong. But as a get out of jail, yes, you've got a black slider. For the highlights, yes, you've got a white slider. You can use those tools to help you, but I would always go one step back. Why am I in this spot? Why am I needing a tool to fix something? Because it normally means, not always, but normally, that I've overdone something. Brian, not a lot of application apart from tethered shooting. Not really. I mean, it is literally that. It's giving you the exposure evaluation tool, that is. It's giving you a view of what came in to the program. You could you use it as a reference throughout? Possibly, having it up there to remind you of what you could have done differently. Maybe nostalgia. But generally speaking, your exposure evaluation tool is designed so that if you're in the environment while you're shooting, you can make adjustments to fix this, in this case, underexposure. If you're post-shoot and you're now with memory card and whatever, what use is that tool really, other than confirming what you can probably see on the screen? Right, let's move on. Ash. So, quick one for you. For those people that are sending in files, if you're thinking about it, please send in your RAWs. Ash has sent in a TIFF, which isn't a problem. So we can still play with a TIFF for many things. But what we can't do is access some of the extra dynamic range that maybe the camera had access to. So the bits beyond 0 and 255 that the raw file has, Capture One can get access to, but once it's embedded in a TIFF and flattened as it is, that data's gone. So anything that's less than 0 or more than 255 in this edit, I can't get access to, whereas in the raw file I would be able to. The way that you send the raw file with adjustments, as a reminder, right click, export original files. Just get rid of that one because it's not going to make sense. Export as EIP, and it will automatically include adjustments. This EIP is your raw file and the adjustments all as one file, and then we can see that image, that edit, and all the variants that you've done. Very useful. if you send in a TIFF file, so the first thing is we can't do things like white balance. And this is regardless of whether you send it to me. This is for your reference. If you have a JPEG or a TIFF, people say, oh, you can't edit with that. Of course you can. We can whack up exposure. We can fix shadows. We can do all that stuff. What we cannot do is change white balance very well. So, for example, Kelvin, let's make it more warm, more yellow. Ooh, okay. And let's make the tint more pink, yeah, or more green. Well, it's not actually going more green there, but now if I go low, you see what I mean? So the tint, the Kelvin, so white balance and tint are fixed on a flat file. You do not have latitude to be able to change that too much without having a big impact. So Ash's question on this was, when I change the sky to make it more pink, I get this big red area around the moon. I am not entirely convinced that this is the right moon for this shot. And that may sound like I'm talking in riddles, but something doesn't quite work for me with this shot. If this was taken at 50 millimeters, this moon feels very off in terms of size and in terms of its exposure, bearing in mind for this size of moon, it would have been so bright in comparison to this. I wonder whether this is a composite of some sort. If it's not, then fair play. But I'm surprised. We'll come on to another image in a second that looks at that. But given how dark this is effectively, I mean, it's not nighttime, obviously, but there is quite a lot of potential contrast in there that I'm not seeing in here. Maybe it was recovered with a layer and a graduated mask. But either way, I can't change much about the color of this shot without the original raw. What we can do is go into our color editor. So if I go to our color tab, and if the intention was to make the pinks pinker, as it were, what we don't do to do that is go to our color editor, go to pink and just whack it up, or even go to our color balance and say midtones, let's make them more pink. Because the problem is, yes, you have an effect on the sky, but you're also affecting down here too. So what we would tend to do if you're going to do that and play with it, if you're playing with white balance, you can use the tint slider, because it would only really initially, as long as you don't push it too far, it's only really going to initially impact the sky, because it's the only bit that's got any real pink or green. This you might want to exclude. Given it's a TIFF, and or if you wanted to push it further than that, let's just create a new layer of the sky. Let me just I just want to have a look at something. I'm intrigued. Some of you will know this one. We've got our old rainbow splat dust spot rainbow finder. It's odd. The noise profile stops at the moon, and this is why I start thinking there's something a little bit strange here. Let me just undo that on there. I'm going to create a whole new layer, a filled layer, and we're going to apply my rainbow splat layer. For those of you that don't know what this is, you'll find in masterclasses and pro tips, which I'll cover at the end, a way of discovering what these are. Here's where I struggle. Look at the noise profile, which is completely consistent. Lots and lots of little dots and pimples where the noise has been, well, it's either been sharpened or the noise has been corrected. When I get to the moon, we don't have that same pattern. So there's something I'm not sure what's going on. The reason I'm saying that is because, Ash, you're saying there's a problem with when you change the sky to be more pink or more saturated, the moon is becoming more red, or there's a red ring around it becoming more red. And I think there's something about the way that moon exists in that sky on this picture that's causing that to happen, because it's either a different white balance to the rest of the picture, or there's something a little bit off with it, and that's causing what you're seeing, I think. So of course my AI mask doesn't include the moon, because it's clever enough to know that's not part of it. I do probably want to include clouds in there, so I'm going to go to a normal brush, and just include at a normal flow rate all of this. And I might want to refine it a little bit, not a huge amount, but maybe to there. Good. Now with that sky, I can now go into my color editor, not color balance, go into my color editor and take what's already pink, and we know that by clicking here. Actually, no, it's a little bit blue. So let's make the blue, the hue, a little more pink. Let's make the purples, bring their saturation up. Let's make the pink saturation up. And maybe I do want to just shift. And where is this? This is sat smack bang 138, 137, 139. That's a midtone, right? So I can shift our midtones to be a little more pink or more pinky blue. We can get to there. So I can go from there to there pretty easily with a color editor. With the raw file, we could probably do it with the white balance change that we're talking about. But we are kind of limited in terms of what we're trying to do. The sharpness. So you mentioned, Ash, as well, that the lens that you were using, what was it? It's a Nikon 28 to 70 2.8. It should be pretty good if, f8, that should be pretty sharp, but you're worried about the sharpness. I wonder whether some of that pimpling that you're seeing when I pull up a contrast layer is coming from either sharpening or noise reduction, so whether it's been through a program to do that, which can result in some stuff that's not perfect. I would stay away from sharpening if you're worried about it on here. We'll come back to the C in a second, and instead use structure. So go to a layer, new layer. I'm going to call it rocks. You mentioned as well you don't want sharpness in the sea. So again, global sharpening is not your friend here, because you're sharpening then the sky, the sea, and the rocks. Whereas the only thing I actually need to see sharpness in, that I don't already, is the rocks. And they're pretty, I mean, they're okay. So, but if we're not happy with them, fine. Let's add a new AI brush onto all of the rocks. That's got most of it. I want some fall off so we don't see where the mask starts and ends. Good. And with that layer, we don't use the sharpening tool, we use the structure tool. So structure is a form of sharpening, but I like it more. And you see, so if I do undo and redo, undo, redo, I can do this with sharpening. But again, in the same way as the dust spot finder, my head is going to disappear in a second. If you're lucky, I'll come back less red. But we've got those pro tips. They're still relevant now. They were recorded in Capture 123, I think it was. You will find those pro tips included in there about, there's one called structure, sharpening, and clarity, the difference between them. This is a perfect example. On a rock with a load of texture, adding in some structure, not too much, don't go to that, that's too crisp. But go to there, and you see this works on a TIFF. Don't need the raw file to do this. But that has sharpened that rock up substantially without giving us anything particularly offensive. So if I look at up above before and after, so this is before, this is after. Hopefully you can see that on YouTube. Yeah, just be careful not to overdo it, but it's structure that I would use in there. And then you mentioned, finally, I think, Ash, you mentioned the water, not you wanted to ideally do it frame averaging or long exposure or so on. And interestingly, so long exposure would have resulted with no moon structure, no moon sharpness, because the moon's moving, or we are, or whichever way around it is with that. So to do it in the water, pretty difficult. Let's create a very quick AI mask around the water. Again, I'll come back to your question in a second, George, about exactly this, but I'm going to just... Actually, it's got most of that pretty nicely. I'm just going to refine it a little bit. Okay. And let's look down here at the water. And this is where, because I think you've already used a sharpening tool of some sort or a noise reduction tool, it's very difficult then to get rid of some of that sharpening. But if I did pull down clarity and pull down structure and pull down some contrast, is the most important one in this, I can make it look smoother. It's not smooth, but it's smoother. So if I get rid of that and go to there, it's better. It's not perfect. It's not like a long exposure, but it is definitely smoother. It's calmer, right? We go from there to there. And if I compare these two side by side, we can start to see, because I pulled down contrast, bear in mind, I also need to up my saturation a little bit, not that much, and be careful again because it's a TIFF, but I do need to counter that contrast reduction, which results in a perceived lower amount of saturation. But this top to bottom, so if you wanted pink sky, sharper rocks, smoother ocean, that's how I'd do it. But I wonder if we looked at the source, whether you'd see a very different story. I'm not sure. I'm just going to back away that effect of the pink sky a bit too much. Okay. George asked a question. Sorry. I often advise to refine masks, but in some specific instances. I've heard you make the opposite recommendation. Can you explain why? So, refining a mask is you're using Capture One's black magic, as it were, and it knows what to spread to and from. So let me give you an example. Roger, we're going to steal your picture again, I'm afraid. So I'm going to create a brand new variant with nothing on it. And I am going to use an AI brush to grab this fence. So it's done a good job. Just turn on the mask. Yep. Lovely. It's got the fence. Turn to a grayscale mask. Oh, it hasn't. And here's the problem. Because if I were to go into my exposure now and lift the fence, you would notice it's missing bits. It's not getting the whole fence because the mask is only there. So I've got the other option, which is I can fill the whole of the mask in. So I can sit with my AI brush and I can go, yep, definitely get that bit, definitely get that bit, definitely get that bit, and so on. But if I then push my exposure too much, shouldn't do anyway, but you see how this looks obviously masked. Obviously masked. Whereas, let's go to my grayscale mask. If I refine it, refining asks Capture One to basically spread the mask. Think about it like this: spread the mask based on what logically would make sense to be a part of the same object. I don't know the actual algorithm behind the scenes that's doing it, but it's not feathering. So feathering is basically it's a very obtuse tool. So take wherever you are, put in a radius and allow it to spread beyond that. It's that simple. And it softly goes off from 100% of whatever you had down to 0 as it gets further away. Refine goes from 0, so don't move at all, to how far away from the edges are you willing to investigate to add to the mask. So as I come out to here, that's starting to add in some extra detail of the fence. If I go too far, and I think to your point, George, I now don't just have the fence, I have the whole set of scrub and bush and rock and everything around it. And I've actually lowered the impact of my mask itself. It's spread too far. So when we're talking about refining masks, it depends what I'm trying to get. Even if I were refining this one and apply, I would still be using an eraser to get rid of some of the bits around the edge. And then I end up in a weird place where my mask is a little bit rubbish. So instead, and some of you will have seen me do this, what I tend to do now, because I trust refine a lot more, let's make that nice and small, 100%, 100%. And do you know what? If I was doing this before we had refine, I'd have laughed at you. But time and time again, I do this now. See how awful my mask is? But I'm planning to refine this mask. And I'm telling Capture One, these are the bits that I definitely want you to include. Definitely include these. Let's go to my grayscale mask. Awful mask, right? I mean, let's do my exposure. Awful. Let's refine it. And I now have a subtle fence mask that if I were to pull up my exposure, although it's going to be obvious that it's been lifted, I don't see the edges of the mask. And that's what the refine's doing. It's basically tricking our eyes because it graduates out the edges of the mask. It spreads them a little bit to similar objects. So our eyes are sort of tricked. We don't see that hard line. And that's all refine is doing. If you do it in the wrong place, and this is possibly, again, part of your question, George. So here is my Sky AI mask, nice and crisp, lovely. And I refine this too much, it spreads into other things. So let's refine that a bit more. Refine that a bit more. Now remember, anything that's not black is affected by whatever this layer does. And now all of a sudden my sky layer is starting to affect my rocks. So as I start to maybe put up some saturation, I'm also saturating the rock because of that. If I start to change my white balance, I'm also changing the white balance of the rock and the tint of the rock because my mask has been refined beyond where it should be. So hopefully that answers that question. Alan, your shot, noise and underexposure. Interestingly, linked to the previous one, this is taken obviously at blue hour, just beyond sunset. This is what I'm talking about in terms of, so let's go before and after. In terms of that difference or the differential between a full moon, and this is only a half, well, not even a half moon, it's a quarter moon. It is a darker shot, I get that, and it was underexposed, Alan said that, but this is what I'm talking about. To see that level of detail in the moon in Ash's shot, bearing in mind this was all detail in the foreground, I'm not entirely convinced. Now, Alan's problem here is he's underexposed to get the moon in, and the result being that you've got an underexposed foreground and land element in order to see the detail in the moon. Now, I'm going to let you into a little trick, a little secret. There is no way of exposing this really properly. The only way of doing this would be to have a graduated filter that's probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 stops on the top. And then you're going to have a weird fake sort of looking sky. So we can emulate that. Let's just put in a graduated. So imagine we had a soft graduated filter and we do what I say, which is 4 stops on the top. Well, that's just going to look stupid, right? Now, the problem is that, let me get rid of the mask, that doesn't in this case because it wasn't captured, but that would have given me a lovely crisp moon with the detail in it and so on. But I've knocked out every other detail in the sky. We need so much or neutral density filter to see the moon at the same time as seeing the dark elements of the foreground. That differential is just too much in dynamic range. You're not going to be able to recover it. So when I see this and the question is, I was trying to expose for the moon or I was trying to expose for the foreground, most of you will know I'm not a fan of composites. Why? Because that wasn't the same to if a composite was taken within a second of itself, I sort of get it. That's called HDR. What I see with a lot of composites is not that. It's actually a lie. It's a moon that was taken on day 1, stars that were taken on day 2, a pink unicorn on day 4, a troll coming out of a Icelandic hill on day 7, and then a waterfall on day 8. And it's rubbish. It's not true. You may as well just go and use AI tools to do that stuff. It's not photography in that sense. Each individual element was, but you're creating a piece of art, and that's fine, but it's not a scene that actually existed, in my opinion. So the problem with a composite is that you're not using elements that were there at the same time. HDR as a composite, very different thing. And honestly, Alan, in this case, I would have done an HDR exposure. So 1 exposure for the moon, probably 5 or 6 stops even different to the exposure of the foreground. And then we could have used the HDR tool in Capture One actually to be able to do the two together. As you are right now, we've got quite a lot of noise to deal with, quite a lot of detail to try and pull up. But we can do it. We can try and sort of fix some of this stuff. It's just whether we're going to do it in the 2 minutes that I have left. I don't think we're going to. Overall, in here, actually, Alan, most of your layers are pretty spot on. Just again, before and after. That's a pretty nice edit, right? I think we'd all agree with that. The moon is lost. And this is where I come to, which is at the point of capture, when you were thinking this through, if you're trying to expose for the moon, trust me, unless it's daytime, exposing for the moon will result in a foreground that is woefully underexposed, and you're going to end up in this challenge. Next week's session, we're going to probably spend 20 minutes on this image, getting this to a better place than where you currently are. It's just not going to be today because I don't want to do a discredit to it. But yes, pulling up all this detail in a relatively high ISO for the camera, so 500, in a relatively low light situation, is a challenge for sure. The annoying bit, and I know that you'll be kicking yourself with it already, is if it was done in an effort to keep the moon exposed correctly, that also didn't work, because the moon is always going to be way over anything that you have in the foreground. So by trying to cater for one, we've actually lost both, sort of thing. Can it be recovered? Yes. We will do that next week. But just be careful whenever you're doing a balanced shot of moon and ground, in the same way as sun. You're not able to see the surface of the sun when we're shooting it. Obviously, the moon is not that bright, but it's the same deal. Just be careful with dynamic range. Back to New Zealand. That's the other plan. Go back, get the exact same scene, get the exact same weather conditions. It'd be perfect. All good. Right, so with that said, we will start again next time with Alan's shot here. Ash, this one, just be careful with TIFF files, what you can edit and what you can't. You can do most of the tools that you want. And here with Rogers, just be careful with, please, everyone, use the before and after. Not this one, that was a sample that we just did for masking. But keep an eye on how much of an impact you're having between each different layer and each different major change, because every time you do a major change, it's just a useful thing to retrospectively look back and say, have I made it better or worse, or what are my issues? And if you've introduced an issue, your first step should be to work out what tool has introduced it, not what tool can I use to try and sticky plaster it. Don't try and fix, try and undo, and then use another tool if you can't do that. Okay, so that's us today. As I say, next week we will start off with Alan's. This will be fun. We'll do this one proper top to toe. In between now and then, you've got access to those masterclasses. Sorry, we've still got Alan's thing on the screen. Those masterclasses, which are also in the description in there. Also in the description is not David Grover, is that there, and that there. So you should have a look at all of those. Update or upload your files. You know how to do it now using that tool, WeTransfer. So paulreefordlive.wetransfer.com. In between now and next week, discuss away in the Facebook group. You've also got monthly competition in there. Don't forget, you too could win a pointless virtual trophy. But that's how to get into there. Between now and then, look after yourselves. Go out and shoot. Go out and shoot again, Alan. Get back to New Zealand. And we'll see you then. Cheers. Bye-bye.